Well, good afternoon, my Facebook friends. I am filming here in the backyard of some friends, but what you're seeing is the second edition of the magnificent Comcast building, which overlooks where our dear friends Pamela and David, who you will meet in a moment, live. And it's also not far from Logan Circle, and if you've been to Philadelphia, you probably know Logan Circle is really at the mouth of the Benjamin Franklin Parkway, which leads to the Art Museum. I just want to pan this. They have a lovely little patio here, some really cool looking stuff like this, and this, and these.
We should use this for the sun.
I love these things. Okay. And this kind of terrifies me a little bit, but it's all good. So, I'm going to introduce you to our first reader today, a dear friend of ours, both of them. Pamela Tudor. Pamela, welcome. So great to see you. You look fabulous, my dear.
Oh, thank you, Charles.
And so tell us a little about yourself before you start to read some poems.
Sure. So, I'm originally from New York. I grew up in Queens. Yay, Queens. And I've been in Philadelphia for a little over 20 years now. And I'm a painter, essentially. I also make three-dimensional shadow boxes, but mostly I'm a painter, and I frequently paint about my concerns and love of our one and only planet. So you'll see some of the poems I chose today are about that as well. And I live here in this house with my husband David, who's on next, I gather, and we love living here in Philadelphia, and we feel so fortunate to have friends like you, Charles, and Karen.
And that is
Karen.
my lovely wife, Karen. She's also my assistant director. Okay.
So, shall I begin?
Sure.
Did you want me to hold it?
No, I don't. They know my voice. My voice is now known around the world.
So you're okay.
So, I should also add that I am a poetry lover and have been reading poems for just as long as I can remember. So I have a really huge collection of poetry, and it was a real pleasure to look through some of my poetry books, and very hard to choose just a few poems. But today I'm starting off with Anne Sexton, and Anne Sexton was a wonderful poet who unfortunately died by suicide. And I have always loved one of her more cheerful poems, and I think about it often, the last line in particular, so that's what I'm starting off with. It's called Welcome Morning. There is joy in all, in the hair I brush each morning, in the cannon towel, newly washed, that I rub my body with each morning, in the chapel of eggs I cook each morning, in the outcry from the kettle that heats my coffee each morning, in the spoon and the chair that cry, "Hello there, Anne," each morning, in the Godhead of the table that I set my silver plate, cup upon each morning. All this is God, right here in my pea-green house each morning. And I mean, though often forget, to give thanks, to faint down by the kitchen table in a prayer of rejoicing, as the holy birds at the kitchen window peck into their marriage of seed. So while I think of it, let me paint a thank you on my palm for this God, this laughter of the morning, lest it go unspoken. The joy that isn't shared, I've heard, dies young. That's the line that I love. The joy that isn't shared, I've heard, dies young. So, the next poem I'd like to read is by Mary Oliver, and it's called Starlings in Winter. And it was actually this poem that precipitated any number of paintings that I've been making about starling murmurations, that is the flocking of starlings in their amazing, miraculous ways. So, Starlings in Winter, Mary Oliver. Chunky and noisy, but with stars in their black feathers, they spring from the telephone wire, and instantly they are acrobats in the freezing wind. And now in the theater of air, they swing over buildings, dipping and rising. They float like one stippled star that opens, becomes for a moment fragmented, then closes again. And you watch, and you try, but you simply can't imagine how they do it. With no articulated instruction, no pause, only the silent confirmation that they are this notable thing, this wheel of many parts that can rise and spin over and over again, full of gorgeous life. Ah, world, what lessons you prepare for us, even in the leafless winter, even in the ashy city. I am thinking now of grief and of getting past it. I feel my boots trying to leave the ground. I feel my heart pumping hard. I want to think again of dangerous and noble things. I want to be light and frolicsome. I want to be improbable, beautiful, and afraid of nothing, as though I had wings.
Wow. Could you hold your paper slower?
You're hiding yourself.
The next poem I'd like to read is a short poem by Wendell Berry that many of you might know. He's a great poet of our planet. It's called The Peace of Wild Things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free.
Wonderful. Our reader on Friday, who was also a friend of ours, read a Wendell Berry poem also. So there are lovers, lots of lovers of Wendell Berry.
Lots of lovers of Wendell Berry. So I was debating between two of my favorite poets, Pablo Neruda and Cesar Vallejo, but I love South American and Spanish poets, and I chose another Spanish poet instead, Antonio Machado. And I wanted to end with this one. Last night, as I lay sleeping, I dreamt marvelous error, that here, inside my heart, the golden bees were making white combs and sweet honey of all my old failures. And I actually did a little watercolor.
Oh, that's fabulous. Could you bring it a little closer so we can see it? Oh, that's remarkable. I love that.
Poem. I melted a candle
Wow.
to make some honeycombs.
That's terrific. Fantastic reading, Pamela. Really, and a great selection of poets. So, backstage is your husband, David. I'm just going to look at this bird here. So, isn't this wonderful what we have in all
They're
this
trying to get
nature?
to the seed.
Okay.
We're
is right near you.
So let's move a little over here. And let me see, David. Oh, there we go. David, perfect.
You got me? Okay.
So let's introduce David. David, give us your full name
Yes.
and
an
your
address.
serial number, your social security number,
Yeah.
everything.
My name is David Schock. I've been in Philadelphia since I was 25 years old. I came back from South Dakota, where I'd been in community action out there. So I've essentially turned into a lifelong Philadelphian, which I never expected to do. It's funny, looking at the poems this time, it was kind of like going back along memory lane. Some things that I've done before, and some feelings I had coming back to Philadelphia from overseas, actually, at one point. And so I've chosen a few that reminded me of that time, the late 60s, early 70s, and one that is later, a poet is later, actually a slam poet. But we'll get to him a little later. First thing I want to read is a poem by Philip Larkin, and I suppose most people will remember he's the poet who declined the poet laureateship of England in 1984. Then Ted Hughes, I believe, got it after that. And I have some Ted Hughes' poems, but I decided not to read him today. He's too menacing. This is called Going, Going. And it reminds me of some of my thoughts about being in England back in the 70s. All right, so Going, Going by Philip Larkin. I thought it would last my time, the sense that beyond the town there would always be fields and farms where the village louts could climb, such trees as were not cut down. I knew there'd be false alarms in the papers about old streets and split-level shopping, but some have always been left so far. And when the old parts retreat, as the bleak high-risers come, we can always escape in the car. Things are tougher than we are, just as Earth will always respond, however we mess it about. Chuck filth in the sea if you must, the tides will be clean beyond. But what do I feel now? Doubt? Or age, simply. The crowd is young in the M1 cafe. Their kids are screaming for more houses, more parking allowed, more caravan sites, more pay. On the business page, a score of spectacled grins approve some takeover bid that entails 5% profit and 10% more in the estuaries. Move your works to the unspoilt dales, gray area grants. And when you try to get near the sea in summer, it seems just now to be happening so very fast, despite all the land left free. For the first time, I feel somehow that it isn't going to last. That before I snuff it, the whole boiling will be bricked in, except for the tourist parts, first slum of Europe, a role it won't be so hard to win with a cast of crooks and tarts. And that will be England gone. The shadows, the meadows, the lanes, the guild halls, the carved choirs. There'll be books, it will linger on in galleries, but all that remains for us will be concrete and tires. Most things are never meant. This won't be, most likely. But greeds and garbage are too thick strewn to be swept up now or invent excuses that make them all needs. I just think it will happen soon. That's Philip Larkin, which is kind of prescient. He's talking about the changes that were occurring in England, obviously. Things were being lost, but it seems to apply now again. This second poem is by a slam poet whose name is Reeve. I did a recitation of one of his works, which I originally saw on TED Talks. I think he did it around 2006. I picked it up a little later, and then I did it for Winter Retreat one year. This one is also by him, and it's called Glaucoma. When you and I are old and gray, I'll have a belly, a hound dog named Shakespeare, and a pickup truck. You will have a pretty cotton dress and glaucoma, which will steal your sight. And you'll stand on our porch in the morning with your face to the sky, and I'll come outside with the bird seed or something, going, whoa, whoa, baby, don't stare right into the sun like that. And you will say, oh, you old poop. I may be blind, but I'm not a dope. I'm a heliotrope. That's a fancy word for sunflower, if you don't remember. And I'll go, I know heliotrope. Hell, I invented it. And then I'll whisper, hey, the yonder is just as wild and blue as people say it is today. But you can't see, but I haven't done yard work for weeks. The crabgrass is practically piggyback on the buttercup. But I love you. I love you. And I'm going to keep you in mind like a crow loved to hold an old telephone line. Remember those? And you'll say, what? Crows? And I'll go, nah, telephone lines. Remember back in the days when the bedding was yours and the bed was mine? You remember that, sunshine? And then I'll shuffle back indoors, bent but still feisty, and I'll do what I always do. I'll lie on the floor with a scrap and a pen. I'll write a poem, describe the rest of the day for you, you blind old.
And the name of that poet again, David?
Glaucoma. Reeve, R-I-V-E.
Okay.
Yeah, and he has a website, and you can catch, he's done a lot of slam poetry, and he's kind of a cool guy. The last one came out of, I think, the attitudes we developed about the war in Vietnam. And this is by Lou Welch, who was one of the California poets from San Francisco. It's called The Basic Con. It's rather short. Those who can't find anything to live for always invent something to die for. Then they want the rest of us to die for it too. These and an elite army of thousands who do nobody any good at all but do great harm to some have always collected vast sums from all. Finally, all this machinery tries to kill us because we won't die for it.
Wonderful.
Welch.
Wow. Wow.
That was great.
Thank you.
Yes, terrific reading and great selection. So I know our audience out there, everywhere, in Galway and Bangladesh and Indonesia and Africa and different places in the United States will surely enjoy hearing those poems. And maybe if they don't know those poets, they'll go and find them and read some of their poems. You know, this is Poetry Month. It's not for poets, it's about poetry. It's for everyone, it's for all people. So read a poem to your loved one, read poems to your children. Read a poem to your mechanic, but read a poem. Thank you again, both of you.